Hey everyone, my name is Aaron from Aaron Reviews Media, and from blockbuster action to boss fights, I'm covering it all. So grab your popcorn in one hand and your controller in the other, and let's dive into Punisher: One Last Kill. I had very high expectations for Marvel's third special presentation, but did it live up to the hype? Let's find out. The plot of this film involves Frank Castle looking to retire his life of being a vigilante as the Punisher when a figure from his past draws him back into the role. It is very much a follow-up to the events of Punisher Season 2 and largely ignores his character from Daredevil Born Again. The plot introduces a lot of interesting concepts and ideas, but then fails to elaborate on them, largely due to the presentation's short runtime. The film tries to tackle grief, depression, suicide, PTSD, and individual purpose all within 45 minutes. The plot also introduces the interesting idea that Little Sicily is worse off because the Punisher's actions, through a news broadcast that the crime rate increased after the Punisher went around killing the mob families. That while the mob families were crime lords, they were keeping the general populace in check. This idea is not fully explored, once again because the presentation is too short. The believability of the crime committed is also not great. A crime family is murdered, and in the first 5 minutes of the presentation, a gangster steals a person's puppy, picks it up, and then throws it in front of a garbage truck to be brutally run over for no gain at all. The gangster doesn't ask him for money. It's not established whether this gangster has a history with this poor civilian, and he doesn't shoot the guy or damage or hurt the guy in any way. The gangster just psychologically tortures this guy by murdering his puppy. It stretches the believability of the presentation a little bit when you have this random New Yorker go cartoonishly evil. It does lead to a nice full circle moment at the end, however, for Frank Castle. The title of the presentation also implies that the presentation is focused on Frank hunting down one person so he can finally hang up the mantle of Punisher, which kind of happens. However, spoiler alert, Frank kills a lot of people in this movie, not just one. There is a person who is responsible for the inciting incident, but Frank really isn't focused on killing that one specific person. I'm not familiar with the character from the comics, but after doing a little bit of research, apparently this character is a pretty important underworld figure in the comics, so they needed to be left alive for future MCU projects. Because this presentation largely ignores the events of Daredevil Born Again Season 1, the AVTF is completely absent from this film. And I think structuring this presentation around the decimation of the AVTF would have elevated the presentation significantly. In fact, I really enjoyed what they did with Bullseye and Daredevil Born Again Season 2, with him hunting down the AVTF agents, but that arc could have been perfect for the Punisher character. Maybe the one last kill in the title could have been Punisher focused on eliminating Officer Powell or another high-ranked AVTF officer. Of course, Powell would have to survive because of his presence in Daredevil Season 2 of Born Again, but maybe a fake-out death or killing a different officer could have been used in this presentation. Overall, I was a little disappointed with the plot of the presentation. It is basically the plot of a C-list action movie with a Marvel skin. I would give the plot a 2.5 out of 5 stars. Serviceable, but disappointing. The Punisher's characterization in the presentation is not consistent with the rest of the MCU projects. Again, he spends nearly half of the film trying not to be Punisher, which is something that I always dislike in superhero movies. When Matt Murdock was trying not to be Daredevil in Born Again Season 1, that was one of my big problems with the season, and Matt needed Punisher, the character, to convince him to become Daredevil again. So why, after convincing Matt to be Daredevil again, does Frank do the exact opposite and try to give up the Punisher mantle? The arcs that they try to explore, like Punisher's grief over the death of his family, his guilt for spending too much time in the Marines and not enough with his family, and his struggles with being the Punisher, were all explored better in his own TV show. Probably because the medium of TV has a lot more time to explore complicated topics, almost like this would have been a better miniseries or movie to give it more time to elaborate on some of these complicated topics. Even if this was 45 minutes longer than it is, it could have explored the themes that it tried to tackle in more depth. I found that the side characters aren't really much better. In fact, they're really absent from this film. It's a lot of Frank Castle, which makes sense. It's trying to focus on the Punisher, but the side characters that are here are not really substantial at all. There is a cameo from the character from the previous seasons, but they're a hallucination of Frank Castle's, and they're only in the presentation for about 15 seconds. The Marines that Frank hallucinates aren't very developed, and I wish we could have seen more of them, or maybe had a flashback to show Frank's relationship with these Marines. It's been a while since I've seen The Punisher Season 1 and 2, so perhaps these Marines are in those seasons and I'm forgetting. Please let me know in the comments if that's something that I forgot, where these Marines were developed in The Punisher Season 1 and 2. But I haven't seen Season 1 or 2 of The Punisher in a while. It's been a couple years. Also, the villain is really boring. Her motivation, mirroring Frank's of "you killed my family, so now I kill you," is kind of interesting, but she only has 5 minutes of screen time, so she isn't really that well developed. Overall, I'd give the characters in this film 2 out of 5 stars. Originally, I thought this was a total character assassination of Frank Castle, but after letting it sit for a while, I realized that this is a fine direction to take his character, but it has been done before in his own TV show, and the side characters are nothing special, so why are we taking the time to tell this story, and why are we redoing the same things that we already explored in Punisher Season 1 and 2? As you can probably tell by now, most of my issues with the presentation I've discussed was its length. The presentation has a length of 44 minutes, which, as I've discussed so far, is not nearly enough time for the development of all the ideas they are trying to present. I would classify the presentation as slightly rushed, but when you watch it, the actual flow of the action and the entertainment value you get from it is paced pretty well. I did not feel bored during this presentation, but I thought it needed more. It also never hurts to have more Punisher action, so an additional 45 minutes or even 30 minutes of just Punisher killing guys would have made me happy, but I would have liked to see these themes developed in more detail if more runtime was added to the presentation. There's not a whole lot else I can say about the pacing of the presentation other than the fact that I wish it could have been longer. While I've been pretty negative about the length of the presentation, the actual flow of the film was pretty good, so I'd end up landing around 3 stars on pacing for this presentation. As usual from Marvel Studios, the visuals of the presentation are pretty good. The kills are brutal and gory, but I wasn't blown away by any of them. They definitely don't match the Kingpin car door levels of, wow, that really happened, and blow you away. There's an indoor fight scene that looks like it was shot in one shot, similar to the Daredevil hallway scenes, but it could have been very clever editing. Either way, I thought the scene was really well shot. There's a lot of really good practical effects in this film, and you can really see that the stunt team really put their heart and soul into the presentation to make it feel like classic Netflix Marvel. The choreography of the action scenes is also done really well. The way Frank seamlessly transitions from all the weapons in his arsenals, especially those taken off his fallen foes, is really cool. It felt very Punisher-like, and his action scenes are definitely the best part of the presentation. There's a little bit of clunkiness in the action when there are hordes of extras on screen. One scene has a camera pan across a balcony of an apartment complex where there are hundreds of people rioting and hunting down Frank, which I thought looked a little odd in the grand scheme of the presentation, just to have all these people doing random acts of violence across the apartment. It looked a little odd because there were just so many people in one scene. I would give this presentation 4 stars on the visuals. Most of it looks pretty good, on par or slightly better than standard Marvel CGI, and nothing visually took me out of the presentation. The high point of this presentation is definitely its entertainment value. If you enjoy schlocky C-list action films, which I personally do, you will definitely enjoy this film. The second half of the presentation gives us approximately 20 minutes of pure Punisher carnage candy. The kills are brutal, and we finally get the Punisher doing his thing after avoiding it for the first half of the presentation. I love gnarly action kills and R-rated violence in films, and this presentation does not shy away from any of that, so I definitely enjoyed it a whole lot. A few things I took issue with detracted from the enjoyment slightly, which is keeping it from a perfect 5-star score. Frank Castle has a lot of plot armor in the presentation. His legs are set on fire for a solid 30 seconds and he suffers no lasting damage or burns. The fire also randomly disappears from one scene to the next without Frank doing anything to put it out. This was the major point of plot armor that I noticed. But Frank also survives falls he shouldn't, and enemies conveniently can't aim their rifles. But again, these things are pretty minor compared to the fire issue and are present in almost every action movie, otherwise you wouldn't have a movie at all. And the fire not being put out really took me out of the film because it's just such a major thing that he gets smoked out of this room and he's lit on fire, he's covered in gasoline, and nothing bad happens because of that. They probably could have found another way to draw him out of the room, or even if they had just lit the room on fire and not Frank, he would have had to leave the room eventually to further the plot. Another thing is I find it far more enjoyable when Frank Castle's on the attack. In his TV show, you see him hunting down these gangs and these mob lords, just infiltrating their drug operations and taking them out one by one. It's really interesting when he's the one that's on the offensive, but in this presentation, most of it, Frank is on the defensive. He's running away from goons that were sent to kill him. He is taking them out in the process, so you do get some really fun action scenes and some really fun kills, but I would have rather him be hunting down that one person. This one last kill is this one person that he has to hunt down and kill to finally either give up or embrace the mantle of Punisher. And it would have been really nice if that was a choice that the film presented to him as something like, oh, I can hunt down this person and once I'm done I can retire, or I can continue taking on the mantle of Punisher. But that's not really a dilemma that the film presents. It kind of tries to present it that way because there's a scene where he stops running away and he starts going on the offensive, which is the moment he fully decides to embrace the Punisher persona. I thought that was one of the highlights of the presentation because he's actually going on the offensive and he's saving the citizens of Little Sicily. He's helping people out, and that's really what you want to see from the Punisher. You have this morally gray character who is not opposed to like brutally murdering people, but he's also doing it for the betterment of his society, the betterment of helping others, and that's what I really get a lot of enjoyment out of from the Punisher's character. And that wasn't really present for most of the film. In the last 10 minutes of the presentation, you start to see a little bit of that. So I would have liked to see more of that in the actual presentation so that I could get even more enjoyment out of the film than I did. But overall, I did really enjoy the presentation. And while the premise and execution of the presentation is flawed, because I got so much enjoyment out of it, I would give it a 4.5 stars on the enjoyment scale. I think that The Punisher: One Last Kill is a severely flawed but enjoyable Marvel special presentation. I was pretty disappointed by it overall, but mostly because I had really high expectations for the presentation. Remember that disappointment doesn't mean bad, it just means that it didn't live up to my really high standards for the Punisher character. It was still pretty enjoyable, but I really wish it had been longer so that we could develop more of those themes that it tried to explore in the first half of the presentation. Either a full-length movie or a miniseries would have been beneficial for this project. It averages out to a rating of 3 stars overall, and I'd give this film a score of 6 out of 10 on my personal rating scale. I would recommend watching this if you are a fan of Punisher Seasons 1 and 2. Do not watch if you only know Punisher from Daredevil, because this largely ignores his character arcs from Daredevil Born Again. And as always, remember to keep consuming media so that I can keep covering it.